Hello, listeners. Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, we will be talking about Burt Lancaster. Burt Stephen Lancaster was born in East Harlem on November 2nd, 1913, to parents James and Elizabeth. All four of Burt's grandparents immigrated from Ireland. He was the fourth child for his parents, and they had one more little girl a few years later. Sadly, that little girl, Lizzie, died when she was just barely a year old. Diphtheria. James Lancaster was a very hardworking man. He was a postal clerk by day, but as soon as he got home, he would be building or fixing something around the house. It was difficult for him to just sit still when there was so much that had to be done. Burt and his brothers soaked in this hard-working model that they had in their father, and Burt would grow into the same kind of man himself one day. As for Mother Lizzie, you know how much I love old-timey descriptions of women. Get a load of this one describing Burt's mother. Quote, "Once a 5-foot 9-inch beauty, Lizzie, after 5 children, weighed 250 pounds and she had a terrifying temper," end quote. She was a wild card, Burt later recalled, and this would be the trait that he would carry on from his mother. Something Burt and his mother connected through was music. He always knew that music could calm her. And one of Burt's first tastes of show business was as a young boy singing in the children's chorus at the Metropolitan Opera House, something his mother was more than happy to nurture in her youngest son. Lizzie and James instilled positive morals in their children and an obligation to always help those who were less fortunate. They wanted their children to grow up into kind and loving adults. And hardworking. Burt and his siblings were working at a very young age. A couple of Burt's jobs were delivering clothes for the neighborhood dry cleaners, delivering newspapers, and a shoe shine in front of Macy's. Burt Lancaster's first official acting gig was in the church Christmas pageant where he played a shepherd. He was 3 years old, and I'm sure insanely cute. Halfway through the play, Burt noticed that he had a wad of gum stuck to the bottom of his shoe. So he plopped his butt down on the stage and began trying to get it off, right there in the middle of the play. But it was stuck. The 3-year-old yelled, "How'd this damn gum get on my shoe?" And he was instantly the star of the show. The entire audience roared in laughter. Well, everyone but his mother. She was mortified. Burt's first official acting role outside of church was in 1924 when he was 11 years old. A huge positive impact on his life was the Union Settlement House, and this is where acting was really introduced to young Burt. Settlement houses were crucial to many children in the first couple of decades of the 20th century. These were kind of community centers, but they were so much more. There, poor children, often immigrant children, were provided with valuable education and cultural guidance. The main idea was that the poor could be exposed to more upper-class social norms and ideas, and that it would help mold them and better prepare them for a more successful life. The Union Settlement House was a huge part of young Burt Lancaster's life, and this is where he was first exposed to theater arts and acrobatics. There at the Settlement House, he met an Australian acrobat. He loved his art, and he asked him to teach him everything he knew. Burt loved reading, but he didn't particularly love school as a child. He made it through okay, though. What he was mostly focused on in school were athletics, especially basketball, which he excelled at. Burt graduated from high school in 1930 when he was 16 years old. Just 6 months before graduation, his mother Lizzie died unexpectedly from a cerebral hemorrhage. This was a devastating loss for Burt. After high school, Burt received a basketball scholarship for New York University. Aside from basketball, he also participated in baseball, track, boxing, and gymnastics. During college, he worked as a youth basketball coach and a summer camp counselor as well. Once he got hooked on acrobatics and got really good at it, though, it was bye-bye NYU and hello, Circus. He and his childhood friend, Nick Cravat, formed the acrobatic team of Lang and Cravat and joined the circus to perform their horizontal bar act. The first small circus they worked for paid them each $3 per week, and they eventually worked their way up to the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey troupes. They did this for 7 years, but a bad arm injury forced the duo to split up and Burt into circus retirement in 1939. He was 26 years old. During the time of his circus career, Burt Lancaster also fell in love and got married, and separated. He married a fellow trapeze artist named June Ernst, part of a circus family, in 1935, but the relationship ended after just 1 year. It wasn't meant to be. After leaving the circus, Burt moved to Chicago and got a job at the Marshall Field department store. He applied to be a delivery driver, but instead, he was given a job in the women's lingerie department. And he was good. He later said, "Sell yourself first if you want to sell anything." Well, the women cruising the floors of Marshall Fields were sold with Burt Lancaster. And then he was drafted. It was late 1942. Burt kind of lucked out by being assigned to the U.S. Army's 21st Special Services Division, which provided entertainment to troops during wartime. But that didn't mean he wasn't put in danger. He sure was plenty of times. While entertaining in Italy, he met a woman named Norma Anderson, who was there entertaining with the USO. And the two began a wartime romance that would end up lasting far longer than either of them could have imagined. When Burt got out of the Army in 1945, he had a chance meeting in an elevator that changed his life. He had just arrived back in New York, and he was at the Royalton Hotel to meet with his girlfriend, Norma's boss. She had returned from her USO tour and returned to work as the secretary for Raymond Knight, a successful radio producer. And she had arranged a meeting between him and Burt to see if she could give him a little boost in show business. Well, there was a man not very discreetly staring at Burt the entire elevator ride up to the 4th floor. They arrived, Burt entered Mr. Knight's suite, and the staring man disappeared. Just a few minutes later, secretary/girlfriend Norma took a phone call from that man. He was a big-time Broadway producer, and he wanted to know if that handsome soldier he just rode up in the elevator with could act. Of course, Norma told the man. He was a wonderful actor. Burt, however, actually hadn't ever really delivered too many lines. A dumb actor, he called it, which was how you would say you didn't have any speaking roles. You don't talk, you just act. Well, the producer, Irving Jacobs, loved what he saw in Burt Lancaster, and he was willing to take a chance. He wanted him to read for the part of a sergeant in his upcoming war drama, A Sound of Hunting. And he got the part. When the play opened in New York on November 21st, 1945, scouts from all of the major Hollywood studios were in the audience looking for their next star. Burt allegedly received 7 offers. But, cool as a cucumber, he didn't jump on any right away. He wanted to make sure he was making the right decision. And then he was approached by agent Harold Hecht, and he convinced Burt that together they could accomplish greatness. Hecht didn't represent any big stars, But he knew he had a star in Burt Lancaster. "Come with me," he told Burt, "and we'll be producing our own pictures in 5 years." Burt Lancaster, with the help of his new agent, Harold Hecht, ultimately signed with producer Hal Wallace, who had just left Warner Brothers to start his own independent production company under Paramount. Burt Lancaster was heading to Hollywood. But not so fast at leaving his life in New York behind and starting a brand new life in Hollywood. There was one little problem with that. Norma was pregnant. More on that in a little bit. Burt Lancaster became an instant star after his first film, Ernest Hemingway's The Killers with Ava Gardner in 1946. He said right from the start, quote, "I've made up my mind that Hollywood isn't going to get me. I'm going to be the one guy who won't let it rot his soul," end quote. Producer Walter Seltzer said of newcomer Burt Lancaster, quote, "Burt was a tough guy to deal with, yet very engaging. Very pleasant and independent right from the beginning. He was very, very self-contained, very matter-of-fact, not starstruck. He knew he had a huge career ahead of him, and he was not full of himself, but full of confidence," end quote. With the instant stardom came the lifestyle that accompanies it, including things like a little fling with Marlene Dietrich. Burt moved his father, brother, and sister-in-law out to live with him in Malibu. But sadly, Burt's brother Willie died unexpectedly just a few weeks after their arrival in California. Heart attack. He was only 34 years old. About a month after his brother died, Burt Lancaster brought Norma out west, and the two got married. After the issue of officially ending his first marriage. Although he and June had been separated for 10 of the 11 years of their marriage, they had kind of forgotten to actually get divorced. And with Burt's new wife Norma came a 6-month-old baby. Interesting. As the press relayed this little detail, Norma had been married and her husband tragically died in the war, leaving her a widowed mother of an infant. A very, very sad story. Of course, none of it was true. The little boy, Jimmy, was Burt's. But that was a big no-no in 1946. This part about little Jimmy is really, really sad. Norma was a heavy drinker, and Jimmy was born with symptoms aligned with fetal alcohol syndrome, including a severe deformity to one of his feet that required painful corrective measures throughout his early childhood. As he grew, he would display some of the social and emotional traits that you'd see with FAS. But the specific examples I read of Jimmy's cognitive, social, and emotional abilities kind of made me think that he could have been on the autism spectrum too. He was incredibly intelligent and gifted musically, but he had difficulties socially and emotionally. Either way, he was an outcast because that's how the cookie crumbled back then. Although I do not love that her child had to suffer because of her drinking, I do want to point out that Norma was not a bad person. She was very active in various political causes, such as the League of Women Voters and the NAACP. And she devoted a lot of her time and energy to helping others. I just read a few things out there that referenced her alcoholism a lot, so I wanted to point out that there was more to her than that. Burt Lancaster didn't stay faithful to his marriage for very long. His first of many affairs with female co-stars began in the spring of 1947 while filming Brute Force. The co-star was the knockout Yvonne DiCarlo. DiCarlo later recalled Lancaster, quote, "knew exactly what he wanted, and at the moment, it was me," end quote. The truth is, the marriage was never really built on love and respect. It started as a wartime fling in a foreign country and turned into much more than they had bargained for when they discovered that they were expecting a child. But they did the right thing, well, the 1946 right thing, and got married. They gave it a good try. The growing family, they ended up having 5 children altogether, bought a larger home in the summer of 1948. Burt and Norma had extensive renovations done to their home to make it the perfect hub for their family. They had the kitchen expanded, they liked to do their own cooking, unlike many other stars. They had a huge living room added, complete with a projection booth and screening seating, a formal dining room, and a large playroom for the kids. They were careful to design their house to be treated like a house. They wanted it to be able to withstand all the abuse 5 kids could throw its way. It was their home, not a magazine piece. They had one housekeeper who came every day, but other than that, they had no staff. Burt and Norma wanted to raise their children themselves. They didn't want them raised by nannies. They wanted to be their children's primary caregivers. Poor Jimmy, though. Unfortunately, in the late 1940s and early 1950s, his giftedness and difficulties blending completely in with other children was seen as odd. He was an odd child. When he was 6 years old, he was enrolled in a different school, a school for children with disabilities and special needs, which really wasn't what he needed either. His childhood would be supported so differently today, thank goodness. Family dinner was a very important part of the Lancaster family daily life. It really is such an important routine to keep in a family, such a wonderful opportunity for communication and togetherness. We always had dinner as a family when I was a child, every single night. People seem too busy for dinner routines these days. I tell you though, in my preschool classroom, lunchtime is one of the most important parts of our day. It's a time to really support that social development. It's so important. The Lancaster family had dinner together every single night. However, Burt would sometimes miss it because of his work schedule. However family-oriented Norma and Burt were, it was reported that there was very little structure in the home. The children could order up whatever they wanted for dinner and Norma would make it. She would make 5 different things for 5 different children if she had to. They didn't have a normal bedtime routine and they could kind of just do whatever they wanted. It was a child-run home, much like many homes today. So ahead of their time. Burt and Norma were also set apart from many other Hollywood couples in the fact that they kept mostly to themselves and their personal little social circle. They weren't part of the hot Hollywood social scene. They would rather stay home and play bridge with their best couple friends. In fact, Saturday night bridge games were a pretty big deal in their lives. In 1947, Burt convinced his best friend and former trapeze partner, Dick Cavett, to come out to Hollywood. He missed him. Burt never really fit in with the fakey-fake Hollywood types, so he just wanted his lifelong best friend near him. So Nick came out west, and of course, gossip started flying around town that the two were gay. Burt didn't care. If he wanted to spend time with his best friend, he was going to spend time with his best friend. Dick Cavett then convinced Burt to do something. Revive their act. In late 1948, the two formed a little vaudeville troupe that hit the road for a tour of Milwaukee, Chicago, and New York. The finale of the show was Burt and Nick performing their horizontal bar acrobatic magic. Earl Wilson of the New York Daily News wrote, quote, "Little girls are squealing for Burt at the Capitol Theater like they swooned for Frank Sinatra, and as they shrieked for Rudy Valley a generation ago." End quote. Burt had a similar response when he tried to go back and visit the Union Settlement House that had been so instrumental in the direction of his life. He thought he could just stroll in and pay homage to the settlement house and maybe help out some of the youth that were currently there. But what he was met with were tons and tons of screaming teenage girls wanting to get as close as humanly possible to Mr. Hottie, Burt Lancaster. He barely escaped with his life. Burt and Nick's act was a smash, and they were offered a 1-month gig with the Cole Brothers Circus. Now, you'd think a huge Hollywood movie star would laugh at an offer to join the circus, right? Well, not Burt Lancaster. He would take the circus over a movie set any day. And Burt was offered a salary that was the highest paid to any circus worker up to that time. $11,000 per week for their 4-week run. That would be $148,000 per week today. Remember, his first circus salary was $3 per week. No word on what Nick received, but I'm sure it was a touch less. Aside from the rich salary, Burt was treated like a king on the road, or on the rails, I should say. He was given a private luxury train car and a private chef for the travels between performances. And he hated it. Remember, he was a simple guy. He didn't need fancy things or special treatment. I couldn't stand the comfort, and the food was too rich for my blood, Burt said. He said thanks but no thanks to the fancy train car and borrowed his manager's car to drive himself and Nick to the circus stops instead. Back in Hollywood, Burt's 1947 movie Brute Force was considered the most violent prison film to date. It underwent extensive cuts due to production code objections to scenes containing excessive brutality. Burt Lancaster walked away as Hollywood's newest tough guy. Wanting more diversity in his roles and more freedom in his projects, Burt and agent Harold Hecht formed that independent production company together, just as Hecht had promised. Norma Productions. Their first film was Kiss the Blood Off My Hands in 1948, with Joan Fontaine co-starring in the film. Their next movie was a lot more successful, The Swashbuckler, The Flame and the Arrow in 1950. Burt got to whip out some of his mad trapeze skills for that movie, too. Burt Lancaster wanted a little more depth and emotion in his work, and now he had it. And then there was, of course, From Here to Eternity and that iconic beach scene. He was still under contract with Warner Brothers, but part of his contract was that he had independent freedom for other projects. In 1954, Burt left Warner Brothers for United Artists, and UA also signed Hecht Lancaster Production Company to a multi-picture deal. Burt was a wild card, just like his mother, and his temper began to be showcased more frequently now that he was such a huge star. He was known to be really difficult on set at times. The smallest things would set him off. Wild card. Shifting back a little, the late 1940s brought some unwanted drama to Burt Lancaster and tons of other Hollywood personalities. The House Un-American Activities Committee was throwing shade on all kinds of highly visible people and accusing them of having communist ties. Burt Lancaster was unfortunately one such person that got caught in their crossfire. Like many other celebrities, he wasn't going to take their accusations sitting down. In January of 1949, Burt was the key speaker at a rally at the New York Commodore Hotel. He spoke about the committee's scare tactics and said, "Can anything be more un-American than the Un-American Committee?" He went on to be a crusader through the whole years-long ordeal. Meanwhile, Burt and Norma's marriage still wasn't doing so hot. They were turning out babies about as fast as you can, but aside from parenting their children together and making the babies, they really didn't have much in common. By 1950, 3 children into their total of 5, Norma was fed up with being the wife of a big Hollywood star. But she didn't want a divorce. She agreed to allow Burt to live the life he wanted to live as long as she would remain Mrs. Burt Lancaster. However, when Norma did find out about the other women in her husband's life, it devastated her, obviously. And it sent her into a heavier spiral of drinking. It sounds like she really tried hard to abstain from alcohol until 5:00 p.m. every day, but the heartbreak of learning of her husband's infidelities was too much for her to bear. A friend of Norma's said, quote, "I know friends of hers that betrayed her, and of course I never told her. They went after him, he didn't go after them. It fed his ego, for God's sake. Burt didn't seek women, they came to him with mattresses on their back," end quote. Oh, poor Norma, I feel really bad for her. And then Burt met Shelley Winters. She was immersed in the anti-House Un-American Activities world too. And there was something different with this connection over the other women that Burt had been with. As described by biographer Kate Buford, quote, "A blonde actress with a brassy New York edge, Winters hooked Lancaster with a sudden, overwhelming emotional force. For the man who had women falling at his feet, this was an affair of love, sex, and politics," end quote. Shelley wanted Burt to leave Norma and be with her. But he couldn't do it. It was the closest he came during their marriage to leaving her for another woman, but he still just couldn't do it. The 1952 hit, The Crimson Pirate, offered Burt Lancaster the opportunity to showcase those mad acrobatic skills again. Burt and his BFF, Nick Cravat, who was also in the movie. Burt was an acrobatic god on the screen. According to director John Frankenheimer, nobody has ever looked like Burt Lancaster in The Crimson Pirate. The Crimson Pirate was the fourth film produced by Burt Lancaster and Harold Hecht's Norma Productions. 1953's From Here to Eternity was nominated for 13 Academy Awards, including a Best Actor nomination for Burt Lancaster, and won the most since Gone with the Wind, 8 of them. Here's a cute story from the filming of From Here to Eternity. Co-stars Burt Lancaster, Montgomery Clift, and Frank Sinatra became real good drinking buddies during their stay in Honolulu. Apparently, Burt Lancaster could hold his liquor the best out of the three, because he supposedly had to carry Montgomery Clift and Frank Sinatra's drunk and passed out bodies back to their rooms each night, going the extra mile by undressing them and tucking them into bed. Frank Sinatra was so impressed by this level of care that he sent Burt a telegram on his birthday for several years afterwards that read, "Happy birthday, Mom." By the mid-1950s, Burt Lancaster had conquered acting, including extreme physical stunts, directing, producing, and owning his own production company. He had more creative control that could have ever been possible just a decade or so earlier. Now he wanted to really showcase his trapeze skills. He was in his 40s now, and he was going to throw his body around like he was in his 20s. The movie was appropriately titled Trapeze, and Burt Lancaster performed all of his own trapeze stunts except for one. A sad story about the movie Trapeze. The stunt woman who performed actress Gina Lollobrigida's trapeze stunts tragically died after a 40-foot fall that resulted in a broken back. Isn't that sad? Trapeze was the third highest grossing film of 1956. By the mid-1960s, Burt Lancaster's box office popularity was beginning to wane, and so was his marriage. After 20 years of marriage and 5 children together, Burt and Norma separated in 1966. Burt was finally ready to leave his wife for another woman. He had met another woman that he regarded more seriously than just a sexual fling, hairstylist Jackie Bone, who was 15 years his junior. Burt and Jackie had a fiery affair, hot between the sheets and hot in tempered flares. But they were drawn together through a connection that neither of them could sever. Burt moved out of the family home and hopped around between hotels and apartments for a little while before settling into a new life in a big, beautiful Malibu beach house with Jackie Bone. The marriage between Burt and Norma Lancaster was officially over in 1969. Norma, officially done with her role as the wife of a Hollywood star, took their youngest child and moved to Rome. The other kids were either grown or in college. She was out of there. The same year Burt and Norma separated and Burt embarked on a new life with a younger woman, he also became a grandfather. Son Billy had snuck off to Tijuana to marry his girlfriend. They were both 17. They had a proper wedding a few months later after they revealed their secret marriage to their families. And then, shortly after, they had a baby girl. Burt Lancaster was a grandfather at 53 years old and embarking on a new life of his own apart from his family. That fire between Burt and Jackie, however, only got more fiery in the bad way. They fought a lot, and they weren't afraid to air their dirty laundry in front of others. While Norma was more submissive and played the quiet, obedient, dutiful wife, Jackie would shoot back and say exactly how she felt, and often act on those feelings as well. She one time took a bite out of Burt's chest during a public argument, And then another time she approached him at a restaurant and slammed him over the head with a wine bottle. Not surprisingly, the relationship between Burt and Jackie did not last. It did last pretty long though. They didn't break up until 1977, so they were together for about 10 years. Burt Lancaster was a decades-long cigarette smoker. He ran a few miles around the UCLA track every morning for years, decades really. He joked to Dick Cavett that he did it to fight the cigarette habit. When Dick asked if it worked, Burt replied, "Not as well as it ought to. It would work better if I gave up smoking." Smoking is a hard thing to give up though. Ultimately, Burt began experiencing cardiovascular problems in his 60s as a result of the habit, along with other health concerns. In January of 1980, at 66 years old, Burt narrowly survived a routine gallbladder surgery after experiencing severe complications. He suffered from 2 heart attacks before undergoing a quadruple bypass surgery in 1983, where surgeons discovered Lancaster's heart to be severely damaged. As biographer Kate Buford put it, all those years of steaks, camels, and martinis had done their damage. Despite all of these health issues, Burt Lancaster continued to act. According to those close to him, however, he had kind of lost his spark. The energy and vitality he'd always had begun to fizzle out a little. The year after his quadruple bypass, in 1984, Henry Winkler persuaded Burt Lancaster to appear in a made-for-TV movie called Scandal Sheet for ABC. Burt did not want to do a made-for-TV movie, but the Fonz was very persistent, and he finally convinced Lancaster to do the movie. And it's a good thing he did. The assistant assigned to take care of Burt on set, bring him coffee and things like that, was a beautiful 42-year-old woman named Susie Martin. The two formed a fast connection and soon spent all of their free time on set talking. And before long, they were in love. Burt and Susie settled into a calm and comfortable domestic life together, not the great roller coaster of passion and hostility he had with Jackie. There was an almost 30-year age difference between the two, but by all accounts, Susie was very happy with their relationship. It consisted of a good balance of leisure activities and work. They loved to cook together and travel to relaxing destinations. They attended the Academy Awards ceremony together in 1988, but usually their Oscar night tradition was having a pajama party for 2 in their den while dining on the same menu each year. Hot dogs wrapped in bacon, Caesar salad, and lots of gin and tonics. It seemed like Burt Lancaster had finally realized the kind of happiness and contentment having a loving partner could provide. I think he just wasn't ready for that in the first part of his life. He had done a lot of reflecting on his marriage and other relationships. He admitted to having had regrets. And he had finally romantically matured into a man who could be in a respectful, equal relationship. Susie recalled of their relationship, quote, "He treated me with such respect. He made me feel intelligent, sexy, all the things any human should feel," end quote. And she wasn't in it for the money. She recalled how when she would go out for ice cream or a little treat like that, he would hand over a big wad of cash totaling several $100s. She would buy the ice cream and return all of the money but the few bucks that she had used. He told her he had never been given cash back before. She divulged a little about their sex life too, but I'm going to spare you those details, except for the part where they had a little fun on an airplane one time. Let's just say they were happy in every aspect of their life together. Burt finally decided now with Susie that he was ready to commit to a monogamous relationship. Took him long enough. When the AIDS epidemic swept the nation in the mid-1980s, Burt Lancaster was ready and willing to step up and assist in any way he could. Many stars of his generation were afraid to become involved because of the stigma attached to it. But Burt never really cared what people thought, and he always followed through with what he thought was important. Elizabeth Taylor was a friend of his, and Rock Hudson was not necessarily a friend, but a good acquaintance. When Rock Hudson's AIDS diagnosis became public and Elizabeth Taylor stepped into action to raise funds and awareness for AIDS research and support, Burt Lancaster was happy to join the cause. He believed all people should be treated equally and was very upset at the way that gay people were being treated. If anyone should have gotten AIDS from having an active sex life, he said, it should have been him. Burt Lancaster was asked to read a letter written by Rock Hudson at the 1985 Commitment to Life Gala in Los Angeles, organized by Elizabeth Taylor. This was a great honor. And the man continued to work. He didn't have to work, but he worked anyways. It kept him young and active, and it kept his mind sharp. What would end up being his last feature film was a really good last act to leave the world. A small but very important part in the 1988 film Field of Dreams. Burt and Susie formed a special friendship with co-star James Earl Jones during the filming of Field of Dreams. Jones had this to say about Burt Lancaster. Quote, "The word liberal doesn't define him. He was a concerned citizen about all things, all issues. His life had a moral point of view, a very strong one. And it didn't have to. It was his choice. He gave his characters his soul in a way, even the bad guys. So he made all of his characters credible. They had a soul too." Burt was a much simpler man than the star. Burt was basic. He was someone I felt comfortable with, and that means he was a simple man, because I am a simple man. End quote. While filming was underway for Field of Dreams in the summer of 1988, Burt's ex-wife Norma passed away. She had suffered a bad stroke a few days prior and had cirrhosis of the liver caused by her years of heavy drinking. She was only 71 years old. Half of the attendees at her funeral were Black Americans who she had helped through her work with the NAACP, who came to pay their respects and thank her one last time. Burt did a few more television movies and stayed very active in his political endeavors, most notably his work with the ACLU. You seriously could not stop this man. He hated getting older, and he wanted to do anything he could to slow down the process. He wanted to maintain as much of his youthful energy as he possibly could. After 6 happy years together, Burt Lancaster and Susie Martin decided to get married in a quiet private ceremony on September 10, 1990. They planned a large reception for the following month with notable names like Sidney Poitier, Dinah Shore, James Earl Jones, Robert Wagner, Don Rickles, and George Burns on the guest list. Plus a bunch of nuns. I forgot to mention, but Susie was briefly a nun in her early 20s. She went from convent to banging on an airplane. Just a little over a month after the joy-filled wedding reception celebrating the love between Burt and Susie, Burt suffered a massive cerebral stroke. He remained in the hospital for 3 months before he could go home. The stroke left Lancaster partially paralyzed and mostly unable to speak. He would require the use of a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Doctors said if he hadn't been so tough and pretty physically healthy, he likely would have died. Susie insisted on caring for her husband at home. She didn't want him to go to a nursing home. The saddest part of life after the stroke was that Burt's mind was still pretty sharp. He had always loved to read. He had been known to read multiple books in a day. He loved to learn and build his knowledge. But the stroke left him unable to read and unable to communicate very well, and this was heartbreaking. Susie was his rock, though. Burt didn't want many people to see him in that state, and she remained a strong and loyal caregiver to him and manager of his life. So many people wanted to pay a visit, but she allowed in very few. She wanted to respect her husband's wishes. Close friends observed in awe at Susie's devotion to her husband. Burt lived with the debilitating effects of the stroke for 4 long years. On October 20th, 1994, he had one final heart attack while lying in bed with his wife. His body wasn't able to survive this one. It had given too much. Burt Lancaster was gone, just shy of his 81st birthday. Per his request, no funeral service was held. And now I would like to share some other interesting things I learned during my research. Bullet point number 1. Burt Lancaster's lifelong best friend, Dick Cavett, died just a few months before he did. Burt's wife Susie knew it would greatly upset him and negatively affect his health, so she never told him. Bullet point number 2. On a less sad note, in 1950, Burt Lancaster showed up to a costume party, spray-painted gold and wearing nothing but a G-string. He was an Oscar. Bullet point number 3. Burt Lancaster requested a high bar to be set up on all of his film locations so he could keep up with his acrobatics. Bullet point number 4. Burt Lancaster had a tremendous fear of flying, and yet he endured several overseas flights. Maybe that's why he seduced Susie on that one flight. He was just nervous. Bullet point number 5. Burt Lancaster was one of a group of 8 who were the first honorees honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1960. Bullet point number 6. He was offered many Lifetime Achievement Awards during the 1980s. And he refused them all. He didn't want the recognition. In conclusion, Burt Lancaster was a man of many strengths and talents. His parents raised him to be a good man and to always be a hard worker, and he carried those traits with him until the very end. Yes, he could have a hot temper at times, but he was also very loving and supportive. His political beliefs were very important to him, and he wasn't afraid to stand up for what he believed in. Burt Lancaster gave such a unique presence to the screen. Not only his dashing physical appearance, but such a complex diversity of roles, and of course, those amazing trapeze skills. That is such an incredible talent. Burt didn't learn until late in life how fulfilling a devoted romantic relationship could be. He had many regrets from his past, but when he met Susie, he realized what he'd been running from all along. Luckily, it wasn't too late for Burt to experience that kind of partnership, and he lived out the last years of his life a very happy, very fulfilled man. Thank you, Burt Lancaster, for your stunning performances on screen. Thank you for showing us that hard work pays off, but allowing time for the things we love in life is also important. Thank you for showing us it's never too late for love. And thank you all for listening. Now I would like to share a review with you. Want yours read on the show someday? Leave one where you listen to your podcasts or on one of my social media posts, and there's a good chance I'll read it on a future episode. This review is from Spotify user Bonds22, who said, quote, "Your podcasts have been super eye-opening, and you have a really comforting tone when you speak. You care deeply about people. Thanks for sharing such fun, insightful information." End quote. Thank you so much, Bonds22. I'm going to try to keep these stories insightful, and I strive to always leave my listeners learning something new about these fine people. I want to give you way more than a basic Wikipedia biography. Thank you so much for taking the time to leave a review. Don't forget to check out Patreon for that sweet bonus content available. You can learn all about it at patreon.com/Stars of the Golden Age Podcast. Also, please give the show a follow on Facebook and Instagram, and follow the show where you listen to your podcasts. And of course, that rating and review. It really helps the show. Thanks, guys. My main source for this episode was a book titled Burt Lancaster in American Life by Kate Buford. I also used a documentary titled Burt Lancaster, Daring to Reach from the Hollywood Collection. An interview of Burt Lancaster with Dick Cavett from July 21st, 1969. a New York Times article from October 22, 1994, and IMDb.